The auditorium was alive with celebration. Flashing cameras, balloons tied to chairs, families holding flowers and gifts for their graduates. Everywhere I looked, there were parents hugging their children, siblings cheering, friends crying tears of pride. The air buzzed with joy, with recognition, with love made visible. And then there was me. I sat among my classmates, cap and gown pressed neatly, diploma folder in my hands, heart pounding. My eyes scanned the rows of chairs in the audience, searching desperately for familiar faces. I looked once, then twice, then a third time. Nothing. The chairs I had saved for them were empty. Empty. That word hit harder than any applause around me. They had promised. My mother had said, "Of course we'll be there. It's your graduation." My father had nodded, though reluctantly, and I had chosen to believe it. My siblings had said nothing, but I told myself that deep down they cared too. But in the moment that mattered most, they weren't there. And it wasn't because they couldn't be. It was because they chose not to be. The day of my graduation, my family walked out on me. It's hard to describe what that feels like. Imagine standing in the middle of a stadium filled with roaring cheers, but all you hear is silence. Imagine holding the proof of years of sacrifice, long nights of studying, endless cups of coffee, tears shed in the dark, and having no one to hand it to, no one to say, "I'm proud of you." I clapped for my classmates as they walked across the stage, my hands mechanical, my smile brittle. When my name was called, I stood, walked to the stage, and accepted my diploma. Cameras flashed, the audience cheered, and for a moment, I pretended. I smiled wide, lifted the diploma, and acted as if someone, somewhere, was cheering just for me. But inside, I was breaking. I returned to my seat, my diploma clutched tightly, and stared at those empty chairs again. They were like a wound I couldn't stop touching, and then the whisper came, the one I had known for years. "You're not enough. You'll never be enough for them." Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And in that moment I realized how much of my life I had spent trying to be accepted by people who refused to see me. I had worked harder than anyone in my family ever believed I could. I had carried the weight of their doubts, their dismissals, their laughter. I thought this day would be my redemption, my proof, my chance to finally earn their love. But the truth stared at me in the form of empty chairs. Nothing I did would ever be enough for them. And that realization cut deep. After the ceremony, the hallways were filled with hugs, laughter, flowers, and family photos. Parents kissed their children on the forehead. Siblings wrapped their arms around each other. Families posed proudly with diplomas held high. I stood alone. A classmate's mother, mistaking me for lost, asked, "Where's your family, dear?" I smiled weakly and lied, "They couldn't make it." The words burned in my throat, but I swallowed them anyway. Because how could I explain that it wasn't distance or work or emergencies that kept them away? It was choice. They chose not to celebrate me. That night I lay in bed, my cap and gown still draped across the chair, the diploma folder on my nightstand. The house was quiet. My phone had no missed calls, no congratulatory texts, no acknowledgement from the people whose approval I had chased my entire life. And for the first time, I let myself cry. Not just quiet tears, but heavy sobs that shook my whole body. Because it wasn't just about the graduation. It was about every birthday they had dismissed, every achievement they had ignored, every time they made me feel invisible. The empty chairs were just the final confirmation of what I had always feared. I didn't matter to them, or at least not in the way I wanted to. Let me ask you, have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where the people you counted on most weren't there? A moment where the silence of their absence was louder than any noise? If you have, then you know the sting of those empty chairs. But what I didn't realize that night, through the tears and the heartbreak, was that those chairs weren't just symbols of absence. They were the doorway to my freedom. Because the day my family walked out was also the day I began to walk into my own life. When the applause faded and the ceremony ended, I was left holding a diploma that felt heavier than any weight I'd ever carried. Around me, classmates were swept into embraces, flowers pressed into their hands, families crying tears of joy. Cameras clicked, balloons floated, voices called out names with pride. And then there was me, standing alone in a sea of celebration. I clutched my diploma to my chest and forced myself to smile as people brushed past me, arms linked with their loved ones. A few teachers congratulated me warmly, and I thanked them with a shaky voice. But no amount of kind words from strangers could erase the ache in my chest. I walked toward the section where my family was supposed to sit. The rows were empty now, chairs pushed back, programs left crumpled on the floor. But I knew the truth. They had never been there in the first place. I sat in one of those empty chairs for a moment, staring at the stage, my hands trembling around the diploma. The echoes of cheers still bounced off the walls, but for me, there was only silence. That silence followed me home. When I opened the front door, the house was dark. No balloons, no cake, no voices shouting, "Congratulations!" The air felt stale, heavy. I dropped my diploma folder on the kitchen table and sank into a chair, the weight of the day pressing down on me. And then the collapse came. Tears poured out of me, uncontrollable, relentless. I sobbed until my chest ached, until my throat was raw. Every memory came flooding back. The nights I had stayed up studying while they laughed at me, the mornings I had left for school while they told me I was wasting my time, the countless times they dismissed my dreams as silly or useless. I had believed against all odds that graduation would change things, that seeing me walk across that stage, diploma in hand, would finally make them proud, that it would finally make me enough. But the empty chairs told me the truth. I would never be enough for people who had already decided I wasn't. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important." And that was exactly what my loneliness felt like. It wasn't just their absence. It was the wall between us, the impossibility of making them see what this moment meant to me. I wanted to scream at them, "Why couldn't you just show up? Why couldn't you celebrate me just this once?" But I knew the answer. They didn't value what I valued. They didn't see what I saw, and they never would. That realization broke me, but it also freed me. The days that followed were hard. Social media filled with photos of my classmates, surrounded by proud families, captions full of love and support. I scrolled through those images with tears in my eyes, my chest tightening with envy. But envy slowly gave way to something else, determination, because if they couldn't celebrate me, I would celebrate myself. I took myself out to dinner. I dressed up, ordered my favorite meal, and raised a glass of wine to my own reflection in the restaurant window. People may have stared, wondering why I was alone, but I didn't care. For the first time, I was honoring myself instead of waiting for someone else to do it. I bought myself a small gift, nothing extravagant, just a token to mark the achievement. Every time I looked at it, I reminded myself, "You did this. No one else. You." And slowly, the collapse turned into the first spark of rebellion. Let me ask you, have you ever had to celebrate yourself because no one else would? Have you ever raised a glass alone, whispered, "I'm proud of me," when no one else did? If you have, then you know how powerful that moment can be. Painful, yes, but also liberating, because it teaches you that your worth is not dependent on anyone else's applause. The day my family walked out was the day I collapsed into grief, but it was also the day I began to rise. Because if they wouldn't see me, then I would learn to see myself. Rebellion doesn't always look like fire or fury. Sometimes it looks like a whisper. Sometimes it looks like a decision so small it seems invisible to the world, but inside it feels like an earthquake. For me, rebellion began with one simple choice: to celebrate myself. The night after graduation, I sat alone with my diploma spread out on the table. For hours, I just stared at it, running my fingers across the embossed seal, the gold letters of my name. Every time I touched it, I reminded myself, I earned this. No one can take this away from me. That thought lit a spark in me. For years I had begged for recognition, for their approval, for even a single word of encouragement. And I never got it. But staring at that diploma, I realized I didn't need them to recognize me. I needed to recognize myself. So I began small. I planned my own graduation party. Not a big one, not full of people, just me. I bought a slice of cake, lit a single candle, and sang quietly to myself. Congratulations. It was silly. It was lonely. But it was also the first time in my life I chose to celebrate me without waiting for them, and it felt powerful. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that night, eating cake alone in my kitchen, I felt like I was beginning to become. From there, the spark grew. I stopped apologizing for my dreams. For years I had hidden them, because every time I shared, my family mocked me. "That's impossible. You'll never make it. Why waste your time?" But now their voices felt smaller, because the truth was, I had already achieved something they said I couldn't. So I began writing down my goals, speaking them out loud, even if only to myself. Each word was rebellion. Each dream was proof that their laughter didn't define me anymore. I also began to build a new circle. Friends who had supported me quietly now became my chosen family. We celebrated each other's wins, no matter how small. We listened without judgment, encouraged without conditions. With them, I felt seen in a way I never had at home. And slowly, I began to realize that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes, family is about who claps when you win. The rebellion spread into everyday choices. When I walked past a mirror, instead of avoiding my reflection, I paused. I'd looked myself in the eyes and said, "I'm proud of you." At first it felt awkward, forced. But over time it became natural. I started dressing for me, not to meet their standards, not to hide, but to express myself. Bright colors, bold choices, things that made me feel alive. I started journaling, pouring out years of silence onto paper. And in those pages I found my voice again. Let me ask you, have you ever taken a small action, one that seemed insignificant, but to you it felt like reclaiming your soul? Maybe it was cutting your hair the way you always wanted. Maybe it was saying no for the first time. Maybe it was sitting alone at a cafe and enjoying it. If you have, then you know rebellion doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. And my whisper was growing louder every day. The day my family walked out of my graduation, I thought it was the end. The end of love, the end of belonging, the end of being seen. But what I didn't realize was that it was the beginning of something far greater. Because in their absence, I finally found presence. My own. The spark of rebellion was small, but it was real, and it was mine. And from that spark, I would build a fire. The spark turned into a flame. At first it was faint, flickering, fragile. But with each step I took, with each choice I made for myself, it grew stronger. And soon it became the fire that lit the path into a life I never thought I could have. Because here's the truth, when you stop waiting for others to validate you, you begin to validate yourself. And that changes everything. The life I built without them started small, but it didn't stay small. I got my first real job, not glamorous, not high-paying, but it was mine. I learned how to budget, how to pay bills on time, how to keep food in my fridge. And each time I did, I felt a rush of pride. These were things they said I couldn't do, and yet I was doing them, alone. I decorated my first apartment with hand-me-down furniture and second-hand finds. Every piece carried a story. The chipped coffee table I repainted, the couch a friend gave me when they upgraded, the mismatched mugs from thrift stores. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And in that space, I felt something I had never felt at home. Peace. Carl Jung said, "In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order." My family had been chaos. Their absence felt like disorder. But in the quiet of my new life, I began to see the secret order, freedom. I pursued dreams I had once buried. I enrolled in a class I had always wanted to take. I joined a community group. I started writing again, pages and pages of thoughts, stories, emotions that had been silenced for years. And little by little, opportunities began to appear. Doors opened that I never thought would. Friendships deepened. Mentors appeared. I discovered talents I didn't know I had. Every step forward was a reminder. I was not broken. I was blooming. The more I built, the less I thought of them. At first, I carried their voices everywhere. "You're not enough. You'll never make it. Why try?" But as I created my own life, their voices faded. They became background noise, annoying, but no longer controlling. Until one day, I realized I hadn't thought of them in weeks. And when I did, it wasn't with pain. It was with gratitude, because their absence had given me space. Their silence had given me voice. Their rejection had given me freedom. I began to travel. The first trip was terrifying, boarding a plane alone, stepping into a city where no one knew me. But it was also exhilarating. I walked streets with no destination, ate meals without judgment, sat in parks watching strangers and thought, "This is mine. This life is mine." Every journey became a chapter of the story I was writing for myself, a story where I was no longer waiting for anyone to walk beside me because I had learned to walk alone. Let me ask you, have you ever done something alone that others told you couldn't? Have you ever taken a step so bold it scared you, only to realize it was the step that saved you? If you have, then you know the sweetness of independence, the quiet joy of realizing, I can, I did, I will. The life I built without them was not fueled by revenge. It was not about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. And in doing so, I discovered a truth more powerful than any validation they could have given me. I didn't need them to see me. I only needed to see myself. The day my family walked out of my graduation, I thought it was the end of everything, but it turned out to be the beginning of the most important chapter of my life. Because without them, I found me. And that was everything. Years passed, seasons turned, milestones came and went, and my life blossomed in ways I never could have imagined. I built a career I was proud of. I created a home that felt safe, warm, and entirely mine. I cultivated friendships that became family, bonds forged not by blood but by choice. I laughed louder, loved deeper, and lived freer than I ever had when I was trying to earn their approval. And then, one day, I saw them again. It wasn't planned. It wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary, a grocery store on a quiet afternoon. I was walking through the aisles, list in hand, when I turned a corner, and there they were, my family. For a moment, the years collapsed. I was back in that auditorium, staring at empty chairs. My chest tightened, my palms grew sweaty. But then I breathed. And when I looked at them again, I realized something had changed. Not them. Me. They saw me too. And I could see the recognition in their eyes, the subtle flicker as they took in the confidence in my stride, the ease in my posture, the light in my eyes. My mother broke the silence first. "You look different." "I am," I said simply. We exchanged small talk, polite words that skimmed the surface of years of silence. They asked about my work, my life. And as I answered, I noticed something remarkable. I didn't care what they thought anymore. Their approval, once my oxygen, no longer mattered, because I was breathing just fine on my own. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." And that truth echoed in me as I stood in that grocery store aisle. I was not the child who sat in front of empty chairs, begging for recognition that never came. I was not the graduate who cried into a pillow, wondering why I wasn't enough. I was what I had chosen to become, and I had chosen to become whole. When we parted ways that day, I didn't feel bitterness, I didn't feel anger. I felt peace, because I realized I had already gotten everything I ever needed, not from them, but from myself. They walked out of my graduation. That was their choice. But I walked into my own life. That was mine. And in the end, my choice mattered more. Let me ask you one last time. Have you ever been abandoned on a day that should have been your celebration? Have you ever sat in front of empty chairs, aching for applause that never came? If you have, then hear me now. Those empty chairs do not define you, because when the people you expect to show up don't, you are given the chance to show up for yourself. And that moment, though painful, can become the beginning of everything. Tell me in the comments, what moment of abandonment became your turning point? Subscribe if this story touched you, because here we honor the truth of heartbreak, healing, and transformation. Share this with someone who needs to know being left behind is not the end. Sometimes it is the first step into your own life. And I'll leave you with Jung's words, one final time. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And the day of my graduation, when my family walked out, was the day I finally began to become.